welcome to High Point, Joe and Theo.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah, hi Mark. Thanks for having us on.
I've got quite a few questions to ask you, and we're here to talk about sustainability in construction, but maybe first of all, you can introduce yourselves and tell us about your background. Then I'd like to ask probably more Theo questions around Bywater, the history, the creation, who created it, the benefits of being B Corp as well, I'd like to know. And then the approach of the company to design and build timber buildings or renovate, retrofit, how you select your collaborators and designers and how you bring them on board, and maybe a few projects. That's the highlight. But yeah, first of all, can I ask you both to introduce yourselves the way you would like to be introduced?
Sure. So I'll go first. So my name's Theo. I'm one of the founders of the business, going back quite a few years now. Myself and a guy called Richard Walker founded the business. And really now I'm COO, I guess really in charge of the delivery of everything that we do. So over the years that we've been working and growing as a business, I tend to have always taken the lead on projects themselves. So the development side more than the investment side of the business.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, and so I'm Joe Jack Williams, so I'm the head of sustainability at Bywater. So recently joined, sort of end of November. And my role here is really just to kind of capture some of the stuff that Bywater has been doing fantastically well implicitly and kind of make it that bit more explicit and really kind of push those kind of agenda forward within the projects and kind of embody it, making sure that everybody's on that kind of right sort of approach, I suppose. So yeah, so it's a new role, so it's all super exciting. Sort of my background before that was mechanical engineering, and then eventually a partner at an architectural practice. So been doing buildings for many years.
Cool. So Theo, can you tell us a bit more about Bywater, how it was created, when? It seems to be 18 years ago, which is quite a while ago. But
yeah, sure. So Bywater really started with myself and a guy called Richard Walker, and we were colleagues together at Jones Lang LaSalle. Like so often happens, I think, when entrepreneurial businesses start, we were colleagues, friends, started sharing, or found a shared passion for kicking around ideas in the pub after work as to what we might do when we jumped ship and started our own business. And then one day that actually came about, and really that was because Richard, although he was on the grad scheme at Jones Lang LaSalle, his family is the family behind Iceland Foods. So one day, I was very fortunate in the sense that quite early in my career, Richard said, "Listen, all these chats that we're having, this is my family background that he kept very quiet while he was at Jones Lang. Let's do it. I'm going to chuck in my job. I want you to chuck in your job because I want a business partner to come with me on the journey." So 5 years into our careers as surveyors, I guess we were out of big corporate on our own with a tiny office with no windows. Actually, our first office, and we got ourselves 2 laptops, a printer, and we were a property company. And so it's all grown from there, which feels kind of amazing in retrospect. But
at least it's not a garage.
It's not a garage, but it wasn't a great deal more glamorous. I can promise you. But and then over the years, really, we went through a series of evolutions, I guess, from what started as you'd have gathered, essentially as a family office backed by one family, then a second family were involved very early on, and then friends of family, and then that grew into another iteration of raising a small fund. So again, I think probably a fairly typical pattern of gradual leapfrogs from smaller business growing into slightly larger business through to where we are today. And we might talk about this separately, but in the last couple of years, very much because of our focus on timber buildings, really, we've taken a really dramatic step change. So now we have a 50% shareholder called Sumitomo Forestry, who's a very large multinational Japanese forestry company. So we've gone on a journey from small family office, just myself and Richard in as you say, the typical entrepreneurial garage almost, through to being owned by, or part owned by, a big multinational listed Japanese company. So it's been a fascinating journey, and where we find ourselves now is at a really exciting moment of growth, even though it's taken quite a while to get there.
What drove you to sell some equity to that firm, or maybe get somebody on board? Was it because there was common visions and you want to develop more?
Yeah, it's a very much common vision. The relationship with Sumitomo Forestry started out initially as a joint venture on our building in Vauxhall called the Paradise Building, and that's one of the first mass timber office buildings to come forward in the UK, certainly speculative mass timber office building. And we were looking for an investor partner, having got planning for that building, to come on board to help us actually deliver it. And we were introduced to Sumitomo Forestry. They, it turned out, had been looking for exactly that sort of project in Europe, actually, but with a particular kind of focus on the UK and likely London for a signature project. So they came on board, but we rapidly found that there was really great alignment between the ethoses of the two businesses, particularly in terms of the focus on timber construction and low carbon. And that really is how Sumitomo Forestry ideally like to work. They do joint ventures on single projects, but ideally what they like is long-term partnering relationships. So really quite rapidly, having done the JV on the Paradise Building, the conversation evolved into more of a corporate deal, and resulted just a year later in their acquisition of a 50% stake in Bywater as a business, effectively to do more of the same in terms of low carbon office buildings, both new build and cut and carve refurbishment, but also, and I'm sure we'll come on to this as well, also to start looking at the residential market, where Sumitomo around the world are a really significant player, particularly timber-led residential.
And is it only to focus on the UK, or there's an aspiration to go outside, look outside?
There is an aspiration to go outside. Our remit with Sumitomo Forestry is Europe wide. Because we're a UK based business, we've always taken the view that we will start in the UK, but we're beginning to think about what a transition into Europe looks like. We're beginning to think about, whether when we say Europe, we're thinking about the totality of Europe or particular countries, or probably more likely particular cities. So it's an evolving position at the minute, but we are beginning to actively look around which markets do we think are credible for us to operate in, are open, particularly open to the idea of timber buildings, which regulatory environments suit that well. How, from a practical operations position, how would we actually go about transacting and delivering buildings in those markets? We're certainly not going to jump in rapidly to that, but we're beginning to really lay some proper groundwork thinking on that.
Joe, have you got experience solely on working in the UK or outside? What's your experience in?
Yeah, so where I used to work for an architecture practice called Phil and Clegg Bradley Studios, and so within that, actually, we worked sort of internationally. Most of our work was kind of UK based. And I think what's really interesting is, certainly in Europe, we're way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of sustainable design. And that's one of the things that really appeals to Sumitomo. We're able to be in this kind of position where then Sumitomo, Bywater can be kind of pioneering. If you look across Europe, there's some really great countries doing amazing things. Denmark always, the Scandi countries are always doing amazing things. France has got some fantastic regulations about bio-based materials, for instance. So actually, when we start to look at markets, one of the things we're looking at is, what can we bring? What's new? And I think when you look at things like the net zero carbon building standard, it's really pioneering. If you look at things like, Part Z, embodied carbon regulations, actually we're still, we're kind of in the mix. So, it's understanding where we sit within those kind of European countries. I've certainly worked abroad, from Djibouti to Bangladesh to the US and other kind of weird places, Caribbean islands and things like this. So I've got a fairly good idea of where it sort of fits in that kind of mix. And it's nice to be in a position, in the UK where we really are at kind of forefront of sustainability in some places. Not always, but we really are. I think it's easy to forget.
I mean, there's a whole discussion around this on regulations and which country is most advanced. I mean, it's probably not the stupid question, this one, but what can we see? What are the trends? Where's the UK a bit late? Where's the UK in advance? And you can tell me after, but I can see a lot of really, especially on maybe acoustics and modular solutions and developments, that the UK is a little bit late compared to other countries. Well, maybe not pushing it as hard as other countries like Germany and France, but also some of the Baltic countries who are really, really looking at timber. And obviously Scandinavian countries.
I think the sort of answer for all these things is, carbon in particular is a good lens to look at, say, sustainability, right? And I think it's useful, but we need to use it as part of that design suite. So when we're looking at projects, yes, carbon's a really important lens to look at it, but I'm also thinking about biodiversity, I'm also thinking about acoustics. And, when we think about acoustics, my background, I did a lot of school design, that's what my PhD's in. And it was really interesting to see how acoustics drove the whole design process for some of these classrooms. I'm thinking about openable windows, I'm thinking about triple glazing, I'm thinking about acoustic braths, I'm thinking about ventilation routes, and, the amount of material between classrooms, reverberation times, the kind of complexity. And when you look at it with a carbon lens, actually you can see that huge impacts coming from some of these things. You think about the window frame, and you think about whether you can, it's a mechanical vent or it's a natural vent system, or, what's going to be your acoustic attenuation between your party walls? Is it going to be mineral wall or something else? It's all part of the same suite, and these are all kind of lenses. So carbon's a really good way of kind of forcing a stronger discussion of keeping sustainability as part of it. But it is just part of the discussion. I think that's the key thing. We want to make, certainly at Bywater, healthy homes, for happy kind of communities that are, integrated, thinking about biodiversity, and can we build some of that up? So again, carbon's a really important link through it, but it's not all of it. It's small of it. And, you're at the Thornton Education Trust Social Value Awards yesterday, and it was just so inspiring. I mean, it's like off the record, it was amazing. Like, we didn't win an award, and I couldn't have cared less in some ways. It was great just to be there in that kind of room with all these amazing people who are making like huge differences. That was great.
Great. Theo, I've got anything else to add around advancements or differences between different countries or outside?
Yeah. I mean, generally, I think it's just an interesting observation that the UK, I mean, well, Europe as a whole, but let's think about the UK, is relatively far advanced in terms of its thinking on a broader range of issues. And I totally take Joe Jack's point that there is a balance between thinking purely about carbon and about a whole series of other things that need to come together to be in balance to think about what real estate in the future looks like. But generally, I think we can do ourselves a disservice in this country where we assume we're lagging behind, and actually we're not. I think that's been, certainly from our point of view, one of the real benefits about the relationship we now have with Sumitomo Forestry, where we are one of, I think, 18 now companies, development businesses all around the world Sumitomo Forestry get those partners together once a year. So we met up just a month or two ago in November, and it was really striking that many of those companies are working in timber and at really significant scale, but aren't necessarily thinking about sustainability and carbon issues in the way that we would think about them in the UK. So I think the fact that actually, although there's plenty of work to do, there's policy agenda that is really important, nonetheless, to recognise the fact that actually we are maybe at the forefront. But then equally, to pick up on this point about timber, there's this interesting dichotomy, it seems to me, that in many ways the UK is relatively far ahead in terms of its thinking about sustainability, carbon, social value, and a range of issues. But on timber specifically, maybe we're a little bit behind. And I think there's all kinds of reasons for that. Many of them historical, some of them psychological. There's still that sense of a lack of familiarity and perhaps a lack of trust in terms of delivering buildings in timber, which is interesting because there's great work being done in low carbon concrete and reusing steel and the rest of it, but timber seems just to play such an obvious and huge role in decarbonisation. It's interesting to me that for a country, for a geography, UK, Europe, that is relatively far ahead, we seem to have a little bit of a mental block around timber at the moment, which is a challenge that we've set ourselves to address.
I think there's a really interesting.
Go on, Drew.
Well, I was just going to say, I think there's a really interesting point within that, in that lots of the companies within Sumitomo's developers scattered around the world build far more in timber than we do in the UK. But it's just because that's what they do, and they don't have that kind of carbon intelligence behind it. Whereas we've got the carbon intelligence in the UK and Europe, but we don't build as much in timber. So it's like, it's a perfect mix. We can come in and support them, and they can come support us both ways. So it's a really nice mix.
Yeah, I agree. There's a big sustainability awareness in the UK, more than obviously my experience in France. As soon as I came from France, I could see loads of measures that weren't put in place for everyday life. And obviously, I've been here in 10 years, so maybe it has changed in France. Well, I can't see the same going on in France, but certainly for other materials like construction, I can see more from the UK than from France. But yeah, there's generally for everyday life and more general subjects, sustainability is quite a big topic, and also the awareness of the carbon footprint of our actions and the objects we buy is so much, I guess, known and maybe accepted, and people don't close their eyes on, but maybe because of lobbies, I don't know. I'm going to have Paul Brannan, who obviously you probably know him, on the podcast, and we're going to talk more about the impact of or carbon impact of materials. But there's also the other episode with Seb, who quoted how the book called How Bad About Bananas, and it's just really interesting to read every single action we do, every single product we buy, every single thing has got a massive carbon footprint, or not, but most of them are.
Well, I think
I think the UK is so much more aware of all this and trying to make more difference, I guess.
I think there's an important point about agency and what we can control as people. And I think, I'm really lucky. I work in the built environment, so I have agency to influence 30% of global emissions. So, or 30 or 40%, whatever figures out there. The amazing thing with that is therefore I can influence and control it, but I've got no interest or control over, clothing supply chains, for instance, or bananas or whatever. And I can choose to make those actions as a consumer, but actually that's not a kind of physical problem. We know all about. We can do the carbon calculations. We can map the supply chains. It's a kind of social problem. It's a psychological problem. It's about understanding why people are buying these things and providing alternatives. And that's so much harder. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm great. I can do fluid mechanics. I can do building physics. I can do all this kind of good stuff. There are numbers, there's answers, but actually influencing people is, that's the frontier for climate challenge. It's not the physics. It's not the accounting. It's how you get people doing it.
Question for Theo, but obviously for Joe as well. As I said to Joe earlier, I like to put myself in the shoes of people I interview. And could you detail your workflow across a project, from the start of a project, getting approached by clients, who are your clients as well, and then developing a project, getting it built, getting the designers and all the collaborators involved in until the end of the project and the handover?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's I guess from our point of view, it's probably a process that's relatively familiar and relatively consistent across the development industry, in at least in high level, in the sense that typically we operate in a very liquid market in the UK. So buildings and opportunities are being presented to us all the time. So I think we did, just thinking about the office side of our business, I think I'm right in saying we were made aware of something like 400, 500 buildings last year. We tend to keep these stats. What were we offered? What did we analyze? What do we actually bid on? What do we buy? So we're in a very liquid, transparent market in the UK, actually, at least in terms of the kind of mainstream market. So we're constantly being sent opportunities. We would typically get together as a team every week, discuss everything that's come through, what feels of interest, what doesn't feel of interest, and why. And that hopper kind of refines down. So we're the team are constantly running fairly high level indicative numbers and opportunities that look interesting, discarding those that we just can't see are going to stack up, drilling down further in those that can. So that process is rolling the whole time. As soon as we find something that we're really keen on and thinks works financially, we're going to do more work on. Typically, we start assembling a design team, and I guess that's where, in the last few years, our approach has probably changed quite a bit in terms of who is it we pick up the phone to first. And increasingly, one of the things that we've really learned as we've started thinking about timber as a primary delivery mechanism for our buildings is, the people we call are quite likely to be different, or at least we call people earlier in the process. So structural engineers, fire engineers, insurers, some of those key disciplines that typically can get left relatively late in the process, we're calling much earlier in the process. So, for example, we've bought a building in Soho a while ago, and one of the first people we invited around wasn't actually architects at all. We took some time choosing an architect, but we did take around our structural engineer, our insurance broker, and our fire engineer as an example. So that's maybe where, with a timber hat on, if you like, our process starts to diverge maybe slightly from industry standard.
And why is that? Sorry, why do you not get the architect first, or architects at the first part?
I think because we've learned through the process, particularly the Paradise building in Vauxhall that's coming towards completion shortly, that actually the perspective that those disciplines bring is absolutely critical. And you've got to, for example, take your insurer on the journey early, understand what their concerns are likely to be, and that ultimately starts forming a tighter brief for your architect rather than the other way around. So yeah, we tend to start pulling a team together pretty early to look at genuine live prospects. The market in the UK generally works pretty fast, so you don't have a great deal of time to put together an indicative bid, and then often a second or even a third round bid. And then once we've secured an opportunity, we start that process of much more detailed design with an aim to get on site as soon as possible. But I think people often assume that for a developer, the focus is getting on site and getting the building completed. But of course, then starts the lease up phase, stabilization phase. There's buildings that we've delivered some years ago now that we still own and manage for any number of reasons until it's the right moment to dispose of that asset. So cradle to grave, the process is really long, and we're closely involved right the way through, from the very initial inception right the way through to the end of the process. I guess one of the things that we are trying to do differently, and hence Joe Jack joining the team, is making sure that there's certain golden threads that run all the way through that. Design is certainly one of those things, but sustainability is the other. So start thinking right from the get-go around what are the sustainability issues in any particular project or situation. How can we address them, and think about sustainability more broadly as well, not purely about carbon as Joe touched on before, but in terms of social values as well as environmental value, if you like.
What are the benefits for Bywater to be doing this? Do you have to do it? Is it like a mission for the company that is set and is part of your USP, or the value you provide you give to a project? And
yeah, it's a really interesting question. That, like, why do you do it? Why?
It's great, by the way.
It's I think in truth, it is really worth pulling that apart, and there's lots of different aspects to it. At one level, why do we do it? Because it just feels like the right thing to do. I mean, as Joe already signaled, one of the privileges and responsibilities of working in the built environment is acknowledging the fact that 40% of global emissions are built environment related. Now, the agency that Joe Jack talked about, we don't necessarily have agency to affect the full spectrum of where that 40% is coming from, but we certainly have the ability to affect some of it. So to an extent, why do we do it? Because it just feels like a generational problem that it would seem extraordinary to be working in real estate at this moment in time and not be focusing on that. But there are other aspects to that as well. So you use the phrase USP. I think, and this comes back to you mentioned in the introduction B Corp and our B Corp status. That's one of the interesting things about B Corp is acknowledging that actually if you can get some of those essentially moral imperatives in balance with a commercial imperative, then you've got a really powerful engine to change. So, I absolutely stand by everything I've said. Why do we do it? Because it feels like a cause. It feels like a mission. It feels like a challenge that our generation working in real estate needs to live up to. But there is, of course, a commercial dynamic as that as well. It's like, well, we do need to raise capital to do what we need to do. To raise capital, you need to stand out from a crowded field. You need to articulate your USP and what it is you're about. You need to present a convincing argument that you've got an answer to what makes the best buildings that attract capital. So those things sit in balance. I think the kind of commercial reason for doing it, but also that moral sense. And it's, I think it's, well, I certainly hope it's hugely galvanizing for the other people in the team. I think most people in our team have joined Bywater not simply because it's a job, but because they recognise they're joining a business that actually stands for something and is trying to do do something about a problem we face, and that is hugely motivating.
Joe, have you got anything to add?
No, I mean, it's interesting as a recent joiner to Bywater, although, I've known Bywater for 5 or 6 years now. I mean, the reason I'm here is because they believe in it and this is what we want to do. It's not a case of it's not greenwashing. It's not it's not about getting a BREEAM standard that says we've got loads of points about transport options, whatever else. Those things are interesting and important, but it's about making meaningful change. I think that's the important bit, and that's the key thing that I think separates Bywater from some other developers. We've recognised the ability we have to influence the built environment. We recognise that, as Theo sort of hinted, there's a bit of a market gap here, which is, there's lots of developers out there who are kind of going through the motions, stuck in that kind of same cycle. And actually, there's an opportunity for us to really break that cycle, think about something a bit more exciting and sustainable, and really start to think about it in a bit of a kind of more exciting or future-facing way. I think that's really important. And what you end up with in terms of our projects, you end up in a position where you end up, you have a team of people who are enthusiastic, engaged, and they want to do the right thing, and you kind of whip people along with that kind of enthusiasm, and that's just as important. Particularly, projects take years. They can be pretty grim at points, with the inevitable value engineering or whatever else. And actually, the goodwill of, doing a good project can carry teams forward to create a better project. And I think that's really important. So start the best foot forward, aim high, you might achieve it, and that's great. That's the kind of key. And that for me is really, the reason I'm here.
I want to ask you more, like a lot of questions around your approach to designing. When do you actually make the decision to use timber? Is it like it's a priority? Because we know it's got so much more carbon benefits or embedded carbon benefits, or like you may look at masonry when the project suits it, or when there's no other choice of doing it. What's your approach when using timber? And because also it's quite, on most my experience with projects and building projects, timber building projects, is that usually timber is quite expensive, and therefore during the early stages it may be abandoned for a more traditional method of construction. What's your approach?
Well, so let's park the cost one for a minute, because that's a whole kind of piece in itself. We can come back to that, but I think it points to probably what is the key difference between Bywater now and others in the market, and that that difference really is inextricably linked to the fact that we are now part owned by Sumitomo Forestry. So, as you say, whereas others may have looked at timber, found it challenging, and decided to perhaps set it on one side for a future project, we are to some extent locked in to always focus on timber right from the outset. But that doesn't necessarily mean timber only. What it means is that on all our projects from day one, we're thinking about how might timber play a role in this project to lower the embodied carbon footprint of the project. So we're constantly debating certainly not how can we get more timber into this project, is always a debate around what is the most efficient material to be used. And it seems to us, and this goes back maybe to what we were talking about at the outset around, perhaps a psychological almost blocker that we've got with timber in this country. It seems to us that it's hard to see how we're going to hit the targets that we're setting ourselves without timber being a significant part of that. But that doesn't mean to say timber only. So we are looking at steel and timber hybrids where that's appropriate. The building we're just delivering at the moment is majority mass timber, but has a significant amount of steel element. So it's always a hybrid solution, I would suggest. But maybe the difference with us is that we start thinking about timber right from the outset, and in two ways. Partly in terms of embodied carbon and how the use of timber might lower embodied carbon. But one of the things I'm always really interested by is where we can use timber in a project and how visible it is. One of the things that's been really exciting about the building we're delivering, Vauxhall, at the moment is because it happens to be next to a railway line and it is a mass timber project. The number of people who got in touch, having seen that structure from the main line that goes into Waterloo, is extraordinary. So one of the things I'm always really keen to think about, and this goes back to, we were talking about the kind of filtering process of seeing how many deals and how we work out, okay, which ones are we really excited about, which ones are we going to bid on. Part of that is influenced by, well, to what extent do we think timber would form an important part of any one particular project that could demonstrably and significantly lower the embodied carbon of delivering this, but also how visible is it? To what extent does it help us communicate the narrative, not just about timber, but about low carbon real estate and the choices that we make as a developer, but also that our tenants make, thinking about office buildings, but it applies to residential as well. The importance, this goes back to the consumer point, and we were talking about bananas earlier, but the choices that we make as consumers, we consume buildings as well. And if you can't see what you're consuming and you can't see the credentials of it, it makes those choices much, much harder. So, we start thinking about timber from absolutely day one on all of our projects, but not through a lens of let's get as much timber into this thing as possible. It's always about finding a balance driven by low carbon, but also to what extent does it help communicate a wider set of issues and concerns, and really give us a platform to encourage industry change, consumer behavior change, education within our built environment sector, and the other stakeholders who sit alongside us, who have just a critical role in making change happen.
How about cost? What's your experience
Well,
with?
Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything on that before we go on to the cost debate. But...
No, I think it's interesting. When I did a book called Materials and Environmental Primer, and one of the key bits there is there's no magic silver bullet for materials, right? Bio-based materials are a no-brainer. They are better for the planet, just generally all round. There's some examples, extreme examples, but when you compare it to sort of minerals, kind of extraction processes and those things, it becomes really complex. So yeah, timber first, that's our kind of priority. But if we put timber in there, again, Theo, we spoke a bit about that kind of our business plan and how that kind of works and how it sits. Actually, if we can't sell a building because it's more sustainable, we're going to really struggle to kind of find that uplift. So it's making it visible is really important. And you can start to think about some of those co-benefits that come with it. So, healthier, people inside it more relaxed. Theo, what was your quote about school kids in a timber building? So 6,000 fewer heartbeats a day or something?
That's really interesting study looking at stress levels as a proxy for attention span in the classroom, basically, but better educational outcomes. And there's this goes across a whole range of different studies that are just beginning to emerge at the moment, particularly focused on timber, but generally, bio-based, biophilic approaches, beginning to point to a really solid body of evidence that there are positive behavioural impacts of spaces built in that way.
I'll add something on this, and from my perspective, because very often, obviously, if we could add bio-based materials on every project, it would be amazing. But especially for acoustics, there's a lot of limitations created by these materials, and obviously the thing we're trying to do with that new company we're just launching in a few weeks is to just raise more awareness of, okay, so these materials are great, they're made of this amount of bio-based material, but also careful because you'll be you'll have some problems with moisture. It's not as resistant with moisture, and it's trying to break the barrier around it and say, okay, there may be some problems there, but if you add a little bit, or if you do this to this material, and if you use this material, you will solve the problem. And there's also on isolation materials. You could use cork as a good isolator, but in terms of durability, it's not as durable. So how do you make cork more durable and stuff like this? So, and same for if you work on schools, have absorbers, and bio-based absorbers are great, but kids will want to damage it or touch it. They'll be very interested.
Yeah,
how do you manage the moisture? How do you manage dust getting into them? How do you wash them? Can you wash them? And usually it's challenging.
So there's a couple of things in that, Mark, I think it's really important. One is bio-based as a kind of start point is a great place to start from. It doesn't mean it's always applicable. If you think about durability and maintainability, I think that's an important bit. And there are other things, if you think about the circular economy, recycled and reused materials are going to become far more important and far more prevalent. And I think that's a good point. We as a society are dreadful at maintenance. We just don't care. The novelty of the new wins out every time, right? And when you start to look at bio-based materials, you think about window frames, timber window frames. If you paint them every 5 years with gloss paint, they will last for 150 years, whatever else. I've got a door frame in my flat. It's 120 years old. It's amazing. And the timber's different quality. There's a whole discussion about that. But if you maintain it, it will last. And I think we've lost those skills and that kind of attention for these things. Because when you look at a lot of bio-based materials, they need a bit of maintenance. But actually, that's no bad thing. I think we just need to get better at it. So actually, thinking about the opportunity cost, is it a better thing to have a lower carbon start point and a little bit more maintenance over its life? Or do you want something that's going to be incredibly durable with no maintenance? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it's case by case. If you think about, absorption, I'm thinking about kind of, impact matting that's going to be sitting under flooring, or something that's going to be, in your partitions to stop, sound flanking around. They're really difficult to maintain. So actually, in that case, maybe a polymer-based thing isn't the worst thing. But, again, it's case by case. And I think we just do things implicitly, not explicitly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it echoes the discussion we were having earlier around just scrutinizing your material choices really hard throughout the design process. And, what we're definitely not about just thinking about timber is timber only. As I said, it's definitely timber where we can make it appropriate, but you can extend that right across all bio-based materials in different applications throughout the building, acoustics and so on. It's just that trade-off. But I do agree that to start from a starting principle of, if possible, bio-based first, and then discount that, rather than trying to find opportunities to weave in a little bit of bio-based where you can, flipping that mindset around feels like an appropriate starting point.
Yeah, I agree. Random question. What's your typical way of designing and building buildings? Do you go more traditional or design and build, and maybe both? And what's your decision process on this? When do you think it's more appropriate to go design and build or traditional?
We have typically of late pursued as design and build approach, and I think we have been conscious that one thing we've not talked about, perhaps it actually relates to the previous conversation around material choices, is the role of innovation and pioneers in supporting innovation. And one of the things that we've been conscious of pursuing design and build, but in timber frame, is that there's all sorts of very strong commercial reasons to do that, but maybe there is an argument you need to adapt your design and build process to take account of the fact that we're doing something that is maybe not widespread in terms of its technology. So simple answer to your question is we are generally design and build, but we look to engage subcontractors really early in the process. So at stage 2, so that they have a clear input throughout particularly in terms of the timber frame piece, because it's so important to us. So by the time you get to your design and build contract, actually what you're presenting them with is something that is familiar, they're inherently comfortable with. So you're smoothing out, if you like, the potential road bumps that you might get with a design and build process had you not done that.
And then for also my experience with timber buildings is that often design and build is probably the best, because if you price for just the design with the solutions and the specifications, then your cost will seem very high. But then the assembly time obviously will be much, much faster, but you don't factor that into the tendering process. What's your experience with this? And do you think there needs to be a more carved approach for timber, especially on repeatability? If you know you can assemble something very quickly, but very more expensive materials, how do you make that decision, and how do you make that calculation if you do it?
These kind of things, it's always about balancing risk and identifying who's taking the risk and how do you mitigate that for them. If you start on a kind of, it's going to be timber frame, and you just sling it out to the market without much consideration, actually what you'll receive is a series of contractors who will come back and say, it's too expensive, here's the cost to do it, because it's not been thought through. To Theo's point about bringing on subcontractors and people who are engaged with it, actually starts to de-risk that. So we can start to factor in buildability and detailing, because what we don't want to find is that, huge design changes that then impact on other packages through the project. That's where the costs kind of come up. And this is where you start to look at contractors with their existing supply chains. And this isn't a bio-based material saying, actually, this is for everything. If you look at Passive House, I know you've had Seb and a few others talking about Passive House. If you look at the Future Homes Hub analysis of housing, they put in a whacking great 17% uplift, I think, for Passive House levels of insulation and delivery, whereas everybody who's delivered Passive House sees it sort of 3 to 6%. And what it is this kind of market knee-jerk reaction to something new and risk. So what we're always trying to do is find a way of reducing our risk, which is the design and build contract is the classic way to do it, but also how do you de-risk it for them so they come in with a reasonable price. That is ultimately the kind of design tension we're kind of trying to manage through it. Does that sound fair, Theo?
100%. It's exactly right, and it's exactly why, going back to conversation we had a while back, why when we're evaluating buildings, we're bringing insurers into the mix early, because their whole business is around risk, or let's say perception of risk. So the earlier you can start getting them comfortable that actually your maybe initial perception of risk is unfounded, because we are mitigating it through these different ways, and because specialist subcontractors are engaged earlier and getting comfortable with the risk themselves, so much the better. So yeah, exactly as Joe said, this is all about transferring the risk and not transferring the risk, being clear who holds that risk and getting them comfortable that it's a risk that they can manage and deal with. That then flows through to your pricing.
And just to kind of note on that, Mark, you sort of mentioned about time, and this goes right to it. That buildability and risk is all about how quickly we can then convert the building. If we know we're tapping into existing supply chains, existing methods of construction, or existing subcontractors, we can build these buildings very quickly using kind of off-site. Think about your kind of mass timber. If you look at Old Paradise Street down in Vauxhall, that was built incredibly quickly compared to, say, concrete or steel, because it's all there, it's all detailed, it's just bolted together. And this is where we see the savings. It's labour cost, it's time cost on site. That all has a knock-on effect. So you get it all kind of correct and lined up, you just pass through the project, and you can do these things very quickly. So yeah, there might be a bit of an additional cost uplift, but we can de-risk it through time saved on site and buildability, and that's where we can make those savings back. That's the kind of way we're trying to balance these things.
Good. How do you select your collaborators and designers? Presumably you don't always get the same as well on every project. What's your selection or tendering process?
Generally, certainly as of recently, one of the key things has been experience with timber, and in whichever sector we're thinking about, understanding, is it a material that a design team have used before? One of the things that I've become aware of increasingly over the last few years that we've been working in timber projects is there is what I kind of jokingly refer to the timber gang. There's a series of events, conferences around timber and bio-based, and you see the same people there, and there's good reason for that. It's because there is a cohort of consultants, architects, designers who have invested heavily in timber, have understood the implications of it. So we are often, not exclusively, but we are often fishing in that pool because we're confident that they've understood the challenges. We're also confident, again, to the point about communicating risk and mitigating risk, that they can communicate to others their experience and how they can overcome challenges. So there is a kind of a gang, if you like, that we're often fishing in. We are continually broadening that group out, meeting new people. A lot of it, I would say, is about personal rapport. I think it's hugely important, as Joe Jack, I think, mentioned earlier. Delivering real estate projects, it's a long haul business. Often business plans will go over 4 or 5 years for various reasons. They might be longer. So relationships are really important. So that forms a key part of it as well. So yeah, I think kind of a mix of approaches, but really, it comes back to perhaps, the themes we're talking about in terms of our relationship with Sumitomo, that sense of getting a gang of people around the table who are all inspired and motivated by the same sorts of things, bring passion and energy to a project. Our role, it seems to me, as developer, a bit like maybe a film producer or a conductor of an orchestra or something. Our role is just to try and get that mix right. And then one of the things that I feel passionately about is then trying to give enough breathing space, if you like, oxygen in the room for that design team to really explore and push things a little bit further. And our role is always to try and keep a kind of commercial check on that we can actually deliver the direction of travel that we're heading in, and not heading off down a flight of fancy, but nonetheless getting that balance right where having assembled a great team with enthusiasm and shared passion and vision, the last thing you want to do is say, right, okay, leave all that outside the door because we're just going to deliver this. It's all about trying to find that balance. Because I think, again, Joe mentioned earlier, when projects hit tough moments, which inevitably they do, often, super talented design team, and we're incredibly lucky in the UK having real depth in the built environment sector. And it's no surprise that architects based in the UK are working all around the world on some really huge projects. They have the ability to resolve some of these problems if you give them enough space and allow the energy to do that. So I think that's a key part, as it seems to me, of our role. No, Joe, if you'd add anything to that, you were on the other side of the table until recently. So
yeah, this is it. No, I think I really agree. I think for me, it's as much about the people rather than the companies in some ways, because what we want to have is this kind of creative environment to solve these issues, and these, you know, as Theo sort of alluded to, we have an amazing raft of creative industries in the UK, particularly around the built environment. We are world leaders at it. You know, we've got fantastic architects, we've got fantastic engineers, we've got fantastic insurers, even. You know, despite the fact that the insurance market is kind of a bonkers market for me. I know nothing about it, but got an amazing creative bunch behind it. Yeah, and Theo's sort of analogy of being a kind of, we're putting these people together. It's a convener where we're trying to put these people together and give them the opportunity to do their best work and, make a profit and make us a profit and make a beautiful place for people to live or work. So yeah, for me, it's as much about people and interpersonal relationships and how you manage that and how you keep people on the kind of, the straight and narrow and, stop them straying too far off into the literal weeds looking for bio-based products or, whether, breaking this kind of concrete, steel, typical timber cycles. It's finding that sort of balance.
Yeah, I've always found the Anglo-Saxons and more precisely the British very good consultants and communicators. And you can have all the technicality you want, but if you can't communicate it very well to you and not lose patience when they don't, need discuss, try to explain it, doesn't understand, then it's obviously coming from the more Latin culture.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. So, Barbara Jones, head of, I think, Strawbale UK, is amazing. A real powerhouse of a woman back in the 90s, was really pushing for kind of straw bale in the UK. She saw some amazing details and, construction methods, and actually just none of it stuck in the UK, but it really stuck in France. So one of my big interests is why certain materials stick in certain countries. And I think it's really interesting, you can probably count on, 2 hands and maybe a foot how many straw bale houses there are in the UK. But, there's hundreds in France. So I think it's really interesting. It's finding that kind of leverage to push things forward and finding the levers and buttons to push and pull and whatever else. So, yeah, communication, really important. How to get people singing from the same hymn sheet. There's a ton of analogies in there. Sorry, these are all soup of analogies.
No problem. What's your approach to tackling building regs? I'll do another long or not intro. First of all, when I started working on timber, the regulations around fire were quite a big deal because there's a lot of fire engineers within the firm I used to work for. We're saying the regulations need to change. And then obviously the acoustic regulations need to change a bit, need to consider more timber design and the aspect of timber constructions. And then the very first blog post I did was about going beyond regulations. And then during last week, I had Chanda, who works for Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam, and he also participated in a community building they were in, that they realized they built it and designed it to the basic regulation, especially acoustics. And they realized after that it wasn't enough. So they had to bring some improvements. And I think they're still doing it at the moment. So what's your approach? What's your approach to not just for acoustics, for other disciplines as well? What's your approach to going beyond building regs if you want or when you can?
Should I go?
Yeah, go for it. I'll add to it.
Yeah. So building regs is a really interesting thing because if you build the building regs, you basically built the worst building you can get away with. I think that's a really important thing to think about, right? And that is basically the government saying, we think this is, what will, get us through. It's not going to be the best, but it'll be fine. And I think, there's a place for that. But it's just not good enough. And what we're seeing is political machinations mean that, from a climate point of view, we're just not going to be far enough along. I think that's a really important thing to kind of clock. if you look at somebody like Letty, or if you look at Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, they are deliberately non-political. They do advise, they respond to consultations and they will advise people, government departments. They're not part of the decision-making process because this is an industry-driven thing. And the point here is that we can deliver these things. We're able to do it. We can do them at, this roughly the same cost. But it's about breaking those cycles. So there's some really important bits. Fire protection is hugely important, and it's a shifting ground at the minute. It's really difficult to know where we're going to be, and it's really, risk. These are people's lives. You need to be really respectful of that. And there's been some terrible tragedies. So yeah, so for me, we don't aim for building regs. We aim for a beautiful, amazing building that's low carbon and sustainable and all of that kind of good stuff. And we should be way past the building regs anyway. But the building regs are there to catch up that baseline. So yeah, that's my kind of approach to it, I suppose. I don't know, Theo, how you feel?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I mean, you mentioned cost there, and cost neutral, almost cost neutral. I mean, I guess often it would be nice to think that going above, whether we're talking about acoustics or whatever, above building regs was cost neutral. I guess the cynic in me suggests that it might often come with a slight premium. I'm sort of volunteering here to give a comment back on the question about timber and cost, which I thought we managed to dodge, but it does sort of come back to that, right? It's like, okay, well, here is to use Joe Jack's analogy, here's a baseline that we have to hit, which is building regs. We can see that we can go beyond that in whatever particular area you might focus on, as well as wanting to do that from the point of view of innovation and advancing the industry. Do we feel confident that is balanced out, that any additional investment will be recouped by doing that? And so often there's that trade-off. I mean, that is exactly the trade-off, not particularly in relation to building regs, I guess, but that is exactly the trade-off that we debated in terms of timber construction at Old Paradise Street, which is a question that you hinted at earlier, that we move beyond, and that that trade-off around, okay, a choice that I'm about to make here, be it timber or whatever else, is going to come with a slight marginal cost. Can I see a value side to that equation that gets me comfortable that is an investment that's worth making? I think that is the trade-off that we're constantly looking at, guided by that that core belief, I guess. As Joe Jack put it, we're not focused on building regs, we're focused on delivering the best buildings that we possibly can, and there's a core belief that the best buildings end up capturing the best value, and you end up recouping that investment. So yeah, I think building regs, exactly as Joe said, I think it's a baseline. It's a baseline there to continually be aware of. That's where trying to be at the forefront of innovation, particularly in terms of materiality, thinking about carbon, thinking about timber. It continually sits not maybe in conflict with building regs, but it's you're continually coming up against regs and standards and saying, okay, well, if we use this material, there are consequences, and how do we work around that? Can we afford to work around that? Hopefully yes we can, and you move forwards, but it's always around balancing a whole series of factors, and potentially to some outweigh others.
I think there's an important bit just to note here, sorry Mark, is with building regs, quite often there's building regs and there's approved documents, and quite often people follow the approved documents, which are a way of demonstrating compliance to building regs. If we find a better way of doing it that doesn't require the building regs, follow the approved document, but it still follows the line of the approved doesn't follow the approved document, but still aligned with the building regs. Actually, that's just in an important way. I think this is a key bit. It's building regs in some ways look like a kind of hard line in the sand, but really that there's a whole way of moving forward and educating. So it's a really important thing to think about. Transparency, openness, dialogue is a key part of this. And if we as a business can see that actually there's a business opportunity here that says, well, actually the building regs could be slightly more stringent on carbon as an example, then it's really important that we have that dialogue and say about that and start to inform the government, because then they can start to build it up and that goes into their evidence base. So yeah, so it's about transparency, openness, and dialogue. I think that's the key bit.
Okay. I'm going to ask you now about some projects, but one of the first episodes of High Point was with the Theatres Trust, and there was a small discussion on working with developers and with who have a requirement to put a performance space within their development. Have you ever had to work on some project like this? Or, Joe more as an architecture in Finland Clegg, or maybe Theo as a developer? What's your experience?
I worked on a number of sort of theatre buildings. So at Fielding Clegg Bradley, we did things like Ali Pally, refurbished Ali Pally. We worked on Queen Elizabeth Hall, some of these big sort of spaces. It's a really interesting, again, it's finding the uniqueness of the project and what's the key project driver. So for us, it was really interesting to sort of think about, say Ali Pally, it's got this beautiful, arrested decay kind of approach, because actually in some ways, that's part of the beauty of the building, but really the key for that building is not how it looks as such, and actually that turned out to be quite a cost-effective way to do it, but it's about making sure it's a performance space that works really well. And that's the key thing. If you build a building that it's a theatre space and the acoustics are dreadful, well, they won't make any money, and therefore the building's going to be redundant, and therefore it's going to be high carbon because we just get rid of it. It'll be shopped and it'll disappear off and it'll be demolished in 20, 30 years. Make a building people love, and it's a great space, and it works functionally. That's the key thing, and it makes money, and therefore it can sort of persist as a kind of key sort of space. So really interesting. Acoustics is that's the driver for those spaces, or it's about flows of people in and out the building, and then how do you enable that in a low carbon way? And that's always been the kind of philosophy. We've been really lucky when I was at Fielding Clegg Bradley. We did lots of kind of refurbishments of sort of theatre spaces. That's inherently low carbon itself, and make sure they're still useful. Certainly Ali Pally, it's a kind of mess of asbestos. That was huge. But if you look at to the Birmingham Conservatoire, how do you teach people? How do you learn about that? But also, I don't know, within the Birmingham Conservatoire, you've got a big auditorium, which has got one set of acoustics. You've got another kind of space, which is like a kind of jazz club feel. And there's another one, which feels like I think it was sort of I think it was like a club or something anyway, but they all had different acoustics requirements and how you deal with that. Yeah, really interesting. It's a really exciting world of that kind of theatre design.
Maybe.
Yeah.
How about you, Theo? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we've never had an opportunity to work on a building actually with event space in it. We've done plenty of kind of pop-up events or handed buildings over on a temporary basis, but never a permanent kind of venue within a building. Be a great thing to know.
Okay. So can you mention a few of the projects you're currently working on, or you have worked on, maybe like 3 or 4, and detail a little bit about them, some
sure.
behind the scene stuff.
Yes, I mean, the obvious one to start with perhaps is the building on Old Paradise Street, which has picked up the name Paradise as a office building, which was really it was a provocation to the design team. Going back, thinking about what we were saying about thinking about our process. We started very on very early on with the design team, with Bill and Clay Bradley, saying, "Look, we're on Old Paradise Street. You know, what a nice gift of a name. Let's think about Paradise as a building." And the name has kind of stuck. So that that really has been this pivotal project for us. We took a very early decision to explore timber frame there. Again, really a similar theme to the conversation we're having earlier. There were always two parts to that decision. It was very much around thinking about certainly a kind of low carbon future and being a pioneer in that space. It was also very much actually about the relationship that particular building has to a local park, and the fact that you've got mature trees essentially up against an office building, very close to an office building, so you're not overlooking a park from a distance. Thing in that office building now, we're coming up to completion. So I was there a couple of weeks ago, standing on the 5th floor, looking out into the park and the trees. That provocation design team was always very much thinking about the relationship between trees and building, open space and workspace. What healthy workspace would mean, and that, as much as the carbon footprint, is what started leading us down a route into timber. But it was also a commercial decision, right from the outset. We're in a location there on the south bank near Lambeth Palace, so we're between Vauxhall proper, if you like, Vauxhall, Nine Elms, and Waterloo. And we were always very clear at the outset when we bought that site, which was it was Costa Coffee's original home. It was the original Costa Coffee roasting plant, which they'd long since outgrown. And we always had this, a very clear commercial strategy that we would have to do something in terms of workspace building in that location that was something really special, because otherwise, to be just another one of the many good Grade A buildings in London, you would just get lost down there. So I think that particular project, it has been absolutely transformational for us as a business. It's become a catalyst focus for us around timber. It brought the relationship with Sumitomo Forestry to the table, and I think it illustrates really well that these things are always a balance between commercial reality and commercial imperatives, and the kind of galvanizing spirit of a focus on carbon. If you can get those two things to work together, you've got yourself a project. So that has been a hugely exciting project. I mean, so many of the themes we've touched on are illustrated by that, in terms of projects that have gone through moments of challenge. We got planning for a speculative office building in a slightly off-pitch location coming out of the back of COVID. We went to planning committee. I think we were the first online planning committee that Lambeth had run. It was a tough prospect in many ways to find an investor to actually buy in at that point when everyone was debating the future of workspace. Had that not been a timber building, we would not have found an investor willing to back that. It was because Sumitomo Forestry were particularly focused on a key exemplar project in the UK market that we developed that relationship. So that project's been really fundamental to our business for the last number of years. But to your question, it's one of a number now. So we're on site with a project in Clerkenwell. We're gearing up for planning on a project in Soho, and another one in Manchester, all of which are timber led but cut and carve refurbs. And that's something we haven't touched on so much perhaps in this conversation yet, is that balance between particularly using bio-based materials for a low carbon outcome for new development, but allied to retaining existing structures, and bringing those two together feels like the absolute sweet spot. So most of what we're looking at the moment, certainly on the office side, I'd say we're sort of 90% weighted towards cut and carve refurb. There's the occasional new build opportunity that comes up, but they're few and far between to find.
I really like the way you present your projects on your website. They're very well explained, and there's loads of visuals around it, and even some art aspects of it. Which is that new? Sorry, because I had a look at Paradise Streets, and then
yes, actually, there's a lot of new material waiting to go up on the website. So it's good to see you found it useful, because it's as ever with websites, it always feels like it's out of date when it's your website. But there's you mentioned art. We've always had a kind of consistent background project, if you like, to find opportunities to work with visual arts in the communities that we work in. Partly because it's one of my passions, and it's always just a pleasure to find a way of weaving what you enjoy into your work. But it's also more than that. We've found it's been such a positive way of cutting through to open up conversations with local communities, which are obviously often very, very difficult for developers. I think it's no secret that there's a huge amount of distrust generally of the development community, lack of understanding and awareness as well as to what developers actually do, and what many of us are trying to do, and the commercial pressures of getting that to work. So sometimes those sorts of projects have been a really useful way of convening a group of people, perhaps in a slightly different environment, or a little bit of a sort of safe space, if you like, to actually explore some of those things and get to know each other better as well, and demystify some of the some of the skepticism that sits around commercial development.
Great. Would you like to mention another project before we wrap up, or something that?
I mean, Joe, and if you want to.
No, I mean, I was just going to add on to the kind of community art bit of Paradise. I sort of hinted at it earlier that we spoke to. We were at the Thornton Education Trust Awards last night, which it was amazing. It's full of incredible people. But actually, if you look at the facade of, say, Paradise, these amazing kind of glazed tiles, which are there for loads of reasons, but part of the co-design with the local school kids, I think it's just a really great way for a generational thing. This building's, we hope, it's going to be there for 100 years, however long. But I think there's something really romantic about school kids growing up nearby, being able to point at it and say, I helped design that. And I think there's a bit of artistic delight that comes with this. And I think too often we can get stuck into a position where, it's functional. We're building a space to be inhabited, or actually, we're creating additions to community that will last 50, 100 years, however long it is. I said my flat's 120 years old, and Theo, I think your house is even older. So there's an incumbent point to make sure that this is appropriate for the local community. So yeah, great. I mean, I think that the arts thing is important. People have got to love the building. Otherwise, it could end up disappearing again. So yeah, I think that's all I was going to add, Ray.
I asked you a question about Costio earlier. What's your view on it? What can you communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question. Well, first of all, it's a question that comes up a lot in relation to timber cost, insurance. They're the standard questions that we get asked. The easiest way of answering the cost point is by reference to the project at Old Paradise Street that we're currently delivering. So at Old Paradise Street, before we proceeded to site, at our kind of go, no-go, if you like, decision point, we undertook a full cost exercise, a detailed cost plan on the timber building that we designed, but also on exactly the same building, steel and concrete basis. Just to cover off exactly this point, what did we feel was the cost differential? And where we came out on that at the time was, I think it was 3.6%, 3.4, 3.6, something like that, in more expensive for timber. Now, that obviously is just one data point. It just happens to be a data point that I'm very close to. It's also a good example because it was a data point that fed into a specific commercial decision, in this case, to proceed with timber. And the reason that we proceeded with timber was the judgment that we took at the time, and this in part is reflected by the commercial realities of that site, the location and feeling from a commercial point of view that we needed to do something really special in that location. The view that we took at the time was that we would make up that 3.6% cost margin on the value side of the equation. Did that come from a kind of clear confidence and a similar data point around a green premium, higher rents? No, it came more from a sense actually of an improved leasing velocity for that building. So I think one of the things that often gets lost in this conversation is the role of time. If you've got something that's marginally more expensive, you don't necessarily need higher rent to close that out. Accelerating a process of renting the building or selling the building, that is equally important. So the view that we took at the time, and I think we would take exactly the same decision today, was a cost spread of that order we would be able to absorb in terms of potentially higher rent, faster leasing, stronger institutional appetite when we come to sell the building at the end of the process. So we took a view. I guess the obvious follow-on question is, well, how representative is that 3.6% cost spread? That's just one data point. It's just one that we happen to know really well. One of the issues with working in timber is that, particularly in the UK, there just aren't enough buildings to really put a fix on this, right? So you can go looking in France or the Nordics for similar data sets. Then you open up the questions like, okay, well, how similar is the Oslo market to the London market? And you kind of go down a bit of a rabbit hole on this one. But the data I've read on this would suggest that kind of 3.6, 5% cost premium for timber is fairly kind of standard. So I know I read a report recently which was a much broader European-wide piece of research specifically about timber buildings, and that was coming up with a very similar figure. So actually, I think the reason that I often answer this question with an anecdote about the Paradise building is, yes, it's only one data point, but actually it feels to me that it probably sits pretty comfortably within the middle of the of the range, and therefore it's a really useful data point for us because when we went through that no go decision, I suspect today we've come up with the same answer. I know we've come up with the same answer as we did back in late 2022, I guess, early 23. We were doing that exercise. So our sense is yes, there is a slight premium at the moment for timber, but I don't see that it should be a premium of a scale that ought to stop our developer peers from moving ahead with timber or timber hybrid buildings. If they're comfortable that it's the right thing to do, obviously in terms of carbon. So it's a question that's continued there. It's obviously it's a question that is influenced by the dynamics of material pricing and timber pricing volatility relative to steel and concrete, and energy sits behind all of that. So it's a continually moving feast. But that sort of premium in the 3 to 5 range feels reasonably comfortable, and that's very much for office buildings. I'm thinking about in terms of residential and the work we're doing at residential. we're sort of in an exploratory phase on that at the moment. But again, I'm hopeful that whatever the outcome of that in terms of cost side, there will be a similar value balancing exercise that makes not just timber but all bio-based materials a viable route forward. Joe, I don't know if you'd add on that.
No, just another really quick anecdote. I think that's the key thing. It's not just the upfront cost; it's the value it's added. So it's both sides of the equation that need to be considered. At Field and Clay Bradley Studios, we did William Perkin Church of England School in Ealing, which I think at the time was Europe's largest mass timber building, about all sorts at the time. It was sort of 2012, 2014, around then, I think. And originally we sent it out as concrete frame building, and the classic sort of DFE kind of procurement processes, strict cost control. And actually Kier Construction came back in the open tender and said, well, we can build it in timber and we'll hit your deadlines. We can do it for the same cost. And it'll be easier for us to build and make sure you can get your students in on time. Schools have got really regimented times when they want their skids to go in, right? So, and they managed to make it work. I don't know, I presume they did all right out of it. I presume they didn't make a honking loss. But again, it's another kind of thing, just saying, actually, what's the driver for it? If you can approach it in the right direction, you can certainly bring down that. Yeah, cost neutrality is probably not the right word, but you can certainly bring it down in line with sort of appropriate building costs, construction costs.
I've got a question to carry on this discussion. But one of the recurring comment and questions and discussions around from previous episodes of the podcast was that obviously CLT was very expensive. And what do you see? Do you see any? And we're gonna have Eco Cocoon in the next weeks, which you may know, Joe. Joe. They make straw panels, timbers and straw panels, and it's the guy Paul Flynn. And my question is, do you see or do you look for other materials that might be more cost effective than CLT or other really expensive materials?
I think the key bit here, you sort of hinted at this saying, timber first. Actually, it's about finding the right material in the right place. So, if it's a sandwich panel, it's OSBs and sort of web die joists or whatever else, that might be more appropriate. And in fact, from my point of view, lower carbon, we can probably source a lot of that from UK timber stocks. Don't have to import it, from Austria or Poland or Finland, which has got a huge carbon concern. And when we think about sort of geopolitics and sort of limited supply chains and import and post-Brexit border checks, all this kind of stuff, actually finding alternative locally sourced products is probably the better way to do it. Now, there's two CLT factories in the UK. There's one in Wales, there's one in Scotland. They are super new. They're not really producing huge amounts of CLT yet. I don't know how they stack up in terms of cost, but if you can find ways to avoid that limited supply chain, all the better. So things like EcoGone, really great. There's ModCell, there's lots of stuff out there. It's not about saying it's mass timber. It's about saying timber first. Let's have a look at it and giving everything the opportunity to percolate through into the project. So yeah, EcoGone, great. Fantastic product, really good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yes, we're exploring all the innovative products that are out there. The only caveat that I'd add, which I'm sure Joe would agree with, is it's not purely about cost. Yes, if you can find something as an alternative to CLT, yes, cost comes into that, but then so does insurability, so does the familiarity with the supply chain. The subcontractors are going to have to put that building together. End investors are going to buy that building from us. So there's a whole basket of things that we as developers need to consider that go beyond simply cost to work out what is the optimal material in this circumstance. comes back to the theme that we talked about earlier a little bit, is finding opportunities for innovation. And sometimes I think, what's needed is to find opportunities. So, well, actually, this looks really interesting and worth trialing, but let's find a small way to use a little bit of it on a project. And next time, if we're all comfortable, fine, maybe we'll expand that. So I think, one of the things that I'm really keen to do is that we find opportunities for Bywater as a client to be supportive of people who are at the forefront of innovating. But that might be a small element of a larger scheme. Residential, I think, is particularly suited to this and exploring this. And we've got a number of conversations running in that kind of vein to say, well, I'll tell you what, we're doing this on the majority of the site, but why don't we give you this little parcel here and just allow some experimentation, support some experimentation. If it goes well, great. We can think about expanding that in future. I think that's a really important role that the development community can, where we can support wider innovation. To be frank, it is, that is not easy for a relatively small business like Bywater compared to some of the large behemoths out there. But it's, for me, it's very much something that we can champion and encourage others to do and lead by example where we can.
Well, thank you very much both. It's been quite interesting to know how you're processing and everything. So how do we get in touch with you? Obviously there's the website.
LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn.
I was going to say website and LinkedIn are the two obvious ones. Yeah.
Okay, and obviously bywaterproperties.com is the website. So again, thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, been a pleasure.